Karl Stefanovic has mocked Meghan Markle's reaction to the fire in her son's nursery, which happened during the final tour before the Sussexes stepped down from royal duties in 2020. The Today Show host struggled to contain his laughter while hearing Meghan describe the story. So, just to get this right, the baby's, what? Not even there, he said? No, the nanny had taken the baby from the room before the fire ignited, co-host Allison Langdon replied. But, so then, the baby's not there when the fire catches, right? And because the baby wasn't there, she was going to have difficulties going to a function. Oh my god, Karl responded. Allison attempted to sympathise and remind her co-host that Meghan was a new mother in a foreign country, which could have been frightening, but Karl only laughed before suggesting to stop showing fake sympathy. That is not you talking. You're a woman who says grow a set. That's what you would say normally, he said. This is not the first time Karl has mocked Meghan, as last year he said the Duchess was acting like the first mum ever while discussing her daughter's teething troubles. Karl was once again scolded by Allison for being insensitive. The thing is, the story doesn't make much sense, so we're not surprised Karl is laughing at her. This podcast is the Oprah interview part 2, and just like the Oprah interview, it's going to turn more people off her. Her podcast has been slammed as yawn-worthy, and yet another swing at the big bad palace. Meghan said she hoped to rip apart the boxes women have been placed into for generations, but royal expert Daniela Elsa rebuked the Duchess as hardly succeeding in her aim in the first episode. Miss Elsa described the podcast as the 878th swing the Duchess has taken at the firm from afar. In a damning interview of the Duchess's new production, she added, "The woe is me dumb is just yawn-worthy. How much more mileage can the Sussexes wring out of the big bad palace storyline?" Some of the reception to the podcast has been hostile to the production, with the Times calling the first episode almost entirely preposterous. The Telegraph condemned the debut release. If the rest of the season is anything like the premiere, what we're really going to be listening into week after week is Meghan interviewing herself. Besides, TV Talk's James Max brands Meghan Markle's new podcast as drivel and tone-deaf. The podcast was debated on Tuesday's edition of The Talk on the Startup Network, with a panel including talk radio host Mike Graham, James Max, and Dr. David Bull, as well as former GMTV presenter Penny Smith and political commentator Esther Crack. But the panel were left speechless after a clip of the podcast was played on the show as James Max and Mike Graham shook their heads and Dr. David was left seemingly in shock. Esther was also speechless at first, but was the first panelist to give her reaction when prompted as she furiously branded the podcast cringe. Esther exclaimed, "I'm really speechless." She continued, "I think the cringe is like giving me a heart attack," to which former Apprentice semi-finalist James Max interjected saying, "It's a cringe fest, isn't it? It's one of the worst things I've ever seen." He continued, "It's drivel. 18 million. If you'd spent that money, I'd want my money back." Later in the discussion, Mike Graham noted, "So we've been talking about, people being killed, lawlessness in this country, people can't afford to eat, their homes, whatever." On Meghan, he continued, "She's going to tell you can write your own future. So who cares? Right planning. We keep telling our allies, say leave them alone. I want them to leave me alone." James Max then furiously replied, "Even since they signed this deal, it's now even more tone-deaf than it was before, in the sense that we genuinely have real and difficult problems that we as a society have."